The story of the Buffalo Soldiers and Black Jack Pershing.
Not many people think of San Francisco and the Presidio when they think of the Civil War. Well, we were pretty far from the action. But it was from this war that some of the Presidio's most famous residents had their origin. These were the Buffalo Soldiers. Historian John Martini.
The 19th century army was segregated, and African American troops served in their own regiments, and they had their own white officers. And these guys were called Buffalo Soldiers. And there were the 9th and 10th Cavalries. They were Buffalo Soldiers, mounted troops, and the 24th and the 25th Infantry.
After the Civil War, where 180,000 black men served, Congress elected to form 4 regiments composed almost entirely of black veterans. Many of them came out of slavery, and only white men were allowed to command them. Still wearing their Union blue uniforms and pillbox hats, they were assigned to the huge arena of outlawry, the Wild West. These soldiers were on constant KP, given the worst assignments and the hardest billets. They were known to be a tough fighting force and as durable as a McClanahan saddle. But in the last half of the 19th century, not one was allowed to rise to the rank of officer. And because they served in extreme and exposed conditions, they were vulnerable to bronchitis, dysentery, and tuberculosis. And then there were the Indians. It was the Cheyenne who gave them the name Buffalo Soldiers. Long experience with Sioux, Apache, and Comanche, and with Chiefs Geronimo, Lone Wolf, and Sitting Bull, solidified the soldiers' reputation among the native tribes.
The Native Americans had given them the nickname the Buffalo Soldiers for 2 reasons. Because of their hair, which they likened to the buffalo's hair, and also because these guys had stamina. And they were good fighters, and the Indians learned to respect them among all the troops that they encountered on the frontier.
That the buffalo were sacred and revered for their stamina was no insult to the soldiers, and in time the regiments grew proud of the name. Now, their time in the Presidio was an interesting period regarding the role of the military in domestic affairs.
They were stationed here because of a very unusual role that the U.S. cavalry had, and that was patrolling the national parks, Yosemite National Park and Sequoia National Park. There was no National Park Service or park rangers in those days. These early preserves of Yellowstone and Sequoia and Yosemite National Park were patrolled by the U.S. Army. And every summer, troops of cavalry from the Presidio, and for a couple of years it was the 9th Cavalry, set out from the Presidio stables, went up to the Sierras and patrolled the national parks. What they were doing was making sure that squatters weren't coming in and settling on park land.
In the early days in Texas, Buffalo Soldiers guarded emigration routes, mapped the territory, and built forts. That same year, 1867, a man named Bill Cody killed 4,000 buffalo in one summer while he was working for the railroad, inspiring a wave of buffalo slaughter of 30 million by 1890. For the Plains Indian, this was one large factor in the beginning of the end. More and more were forced into small reservations on inhospitable lands, and Buffalo Soldiers often took the sad assignment of escorting tribes to these reservations. Then, in 1895, Black Jack Pershing met the 10th Cavalry. John Pershing picked up the name Black Jack at West Point, possibly because his first job was as a teacher in a black school. The story has also been told like this.
Black Jack Pershing, he was at the Presidio of San Francisco, and he got his name because, as I said, white officers commanded the Buffalo Soldiers. For a while early in his career, he was commander of one of the Buffalo Soldier infantry units, and he picked up the name Black Jack Pershing.
Pershing took Buffalo Soldiers to fight alongside the Rough Riders in Cuba in the Spanish-American War. Then they were shipped to fight Los Insurrectos, Muslim insurgents in the Philippines. Wrote one Buffalo Soldier, "We're only regulars, and black ones at that." Most of us will find our graves here.
At the time of 1915, he was sent down to lead American forces fighting the Mexican bandito or freedom fighter, Pancho Villa, who had been crossing over into Texas and New Mexico, and Black Jack Pershing was leading American troops trying to find Pancho Villa. While he was down there in Mexico, his home at the Presidio burned down, and his wife and 2 of his kids were killed in the fire. Yeah, this house was located right where the main flagpole is at the Presidio. It's called Pershing Square today in honor of them.
Black Jack never did capture Pancho Villa. After he buried his dead, he left the West for World War I and attained the rank of Commander of Armies, guns firing all the way.